Welcome back. So in the last video, we were looking at Azure PowerShell. So let's move on and continue. Uh, and um, and just before we go ahead, so basically we're trying to see what are the different ways where we can like manage Azure, right? So we have seen that we can manage it through the Azure portal. We could also do it through the Azure Cloud Shell, and it is a browser-based application, and you can either choose Bash or PowerShell, and we can also obviously use Azure PowerShell, um, and that could be installed in Windows, Mac, or Linux. All right, so moving on. All right, this is Azure CLI. So let's see what it is. So Azure CLI is a command line program to connect to Azure and execute administrative commands on Azure resources. And it runs on Linux, macOS, and Windows. It allows administrators and developers to execute their commands through a terminal, command line prompt, or script instead of a web browser. So if you notice, I mean, a web browser was used in the Cloud Shell, right? Uh, all right. So for example, to restart a VM, you would use a command such as azvm restart -g. So notice that the the command for I mean, like even in this case, right? So we're talking about restarting an Azure VM, and this is through the CLI. So this is different to that of PowerShell, which you just saw, because in PowerShell, uh, and in relation to the new module, which is AZVM, it is together, right? We had, I mean, it was called. Um, let's go back for a moment, if we can. Uh, so basically, we have this new um, AZ module, which is replacing the Azure RM format, and the prefix is AZ, right? AZ. So if you look at this, and notice that this is lowercase, right? It is not um, it is not uppercase a lowercase z, it is lowercase a lowercase z. So you can see that you can, that's how you can like differentiate between an Azure CLI commandlet, or as opposed to an Azure PowerShell commandlet, right? Uh, that's how one would differentiate that. Um, and obviously with the PowerShell, if you look at this, you have new AZVM. It's all together, right? It's all together, um, and here it's you have spaces between AZVM, right? So uh, that's my first impression. So Azure CLI provides cross-platform command line tools for managing Azure resources. You can install this locally on computers running the Linux, Mac OS, or Windows operating system. You can also use Azure CLI from a browser through Azure Cloud Shell, which is good to know, right? So, because for Azure Cloud Shell, let's just move back a little bit. Um, so Azure Cloud Shell, you can use Bash or PowerShell. And do you talk about CLI here? Let's search for CLI. They do not. But obviously, we know now that we could use Azure CLI through the Azure Cloud Shell. Um, and we could also have it locally installed in a system, and it's available cross-platform, right, on Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. Um, both cases, Azure CLI can be used interactively or through scripts. Interactive would be, uh, as we've seen before, it's command running one command at a time, right? So first, for Windows operating systems, launch a shell such as command.exe, um, or for Linux or macOS, use bash, and then use the command at the shell prompt. And scripted would be obviously running a script, running a series of commands in a file, um, and shell script. And Azure CLI lets you control nearly every aspect of every Azure resource. You can work with resource groups, storage, VMs, Azure Active Directory, containers, machine learning, and so on. Um, so commands in the CLI are structured in groups and subgroups. So each group represents a service provided by Azure, and the subgroups divide commands for these services into logical groupings. For example, the storage group contains subgroups including account, blobs, share, and queue, file share. So share, I think, means file share. So all of this relates to storage, right? So that's what I think they're trying to say here, that each group represents a service provided by Azure. So storage is obviously a service provided by Azure, right? And and the subgroups divide commands for these services into logical groupings, right? So for storage, you have subgroups for accounts, blobs, share, and queue. So how do you find the particular command you need? One way to be used to one way is to use az find. For example, you want to find commands that might help you to manage a storage blob. You can use az find blob. So if you run this command, it should tell you, or it should show you what are the commands related to blob. So blob is a subgroup for storage, right? So we're looking at subgroup, so we're looking at commands specifically for blob. We're not looking for commands for file share or queue, right? You're only looking for commands for blob. If you already know the name of the command, you want to use help, right? Uh, uh, you want the help argument for that command will get you more details on the command, right? So uh, um, okay, so basically you have a command group, a list of available subcommands. For example, here's how you can get a list of subgroups and commands for managing the blob storage. And it says to bookmark the Azure CLI for reference. Let's look at the Azure CLI. Let's take a quick look. Alright, so you have the Azure CLI. So across Azure services, alright, so you have the installation, could install it or use it in a browser. Yeah, the Cloud Shell this is how you can become familiar with the CLI. Use the CLI to manage cloud resources. Azure CLI reference, tutorial, feedback, support. Alright, so make sure to bookmark it. I'll also link it in the description of this video. And just going through this one more time. So if you already know the name of the command you want, the help argument for that command will get you more detailed information on the command, and for a command group, a list of the available subcommands. For example, here's how you get a list of the subgroups and the commands for managing blob storage. The blob is a subgroup, right? So if you go back, you can see here that uh, so you have groups. So storage is a group, subgroup would be a blob, and you're trying to find commands, right? You're trying to find commands for each one of them, and use easy find blob. So all right, so this is interesting. So in the next video, we'll do a knowledge check. So until then, see you next time.